All right, let's go ahead and get started here. All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Terry Sigle. I'm Director of SEs here at UnboundID, and today we're here for a customer case study. Specifically, we have Tech Data here, an UnboundID customer, talking about how they've leveraged some of the UnboundID solution for their modernized identity access management infrastructure. So today I'm joined by Eric Toth. He's Global E-Business Architect at Tech Data. To kick things off, we'll have Eric come up here and talk a little bit about Tech Data and some of the things that we're trying to solve, and then I'll be back up to talk about some of the solution. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Terry. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Toth. I'm the Global E-Business Architect for Tech Data Corporation. I'm here to talk to you about the modernization of our IAM infrastructure and our e-commerce environment. And yes, that's quite a mouthful. And I will endeavor to try to make this as informative as possible, even on a subject that sounds that complex. So before we begin, we have a couple of quick facts about Tech Data. It's interesting, I actually got this slide directly from our corporate communications department, if you couldn't tell. It's got some really interesting information about our revenue and where we are on the Fortune 500 list and customers and so on and so forth. But it doesn't actually tell you what we do as a company, which for purposes of this conversation is kind of important. So Tech Data is an IT distributor. And this means that we deal primarily with two different types of companies. We have two different sets of partners. We have vendors, who are responsible for creating, researching, and selling technology. We have some examples, HP, Microsoft, and Cisco. And then we have our resellers, who are our Tech Data customers. And these are companies who procure technology from distribution and attempt to resell it to what we call end users. And end user is kind of a weird term for people who aren't in distribution, but just think of it as the company or individual who's ultimately responsible for consuming this technology, right? They range in size from individuals, such as the folks here in this room, the companies that employ you, the US government, universities, the NFL. It really runs the entire gambit. Tech Data really prides itself on being an e-commerce company. 80% of our transactions across both of our partner streams come in through some means of electronic integration. We offer EDI, we offer heavy API integration, we have a slew of portals. So what does that mean? That means that you really have to have, you think about portals and APIs, you talk about credentials, you talk about identity. So I want to talk to you about, where we started. Every journey begins with a point of origin, and this is ours. I'm going to lay a disclaimer that a lot of this stuff was done prior to my tenure at Tech Data. I'm not particularly proud of anything on this slide, but it is all true. For better or for worse, it's all true. So we actually had separate identity stores for dealing with resellers and vendors. And the main reason being is when we first started doing a lot of e-commerce activity, point-of-sale transactions are always the focus because everyone likes making money. We've started to build our reseller management system on top of our CRM, which seemed like a good idea at the time. What it really came down to is imagine that someone had to log into the CRM, and we had a customer-facing version of this and an internal version of this. Log into the CRM system, select an account number, create a contact, put a lot of ancillary information that nobody really cares about, and then convert that to a web login, which then got replicated into our e-commerce system. It was not a great experience. Nobody liked it. Eventually, as our vendor integration story got more complex, we realized that we also needed a place to store vendor identities. Well, our CRM system said, you're a customer or don't come here. And our executive team said, you're not going to tear apart our CRM trying to fix this. So we actually wound up having to build a custom SQL Server store just to store vendor identities. We had two completely separate systems. Adding to the complication of the fact that, as I mentioned, that you had to associate a login to an account, there are situations that I'll get into more detail later where a single organization may have multiple account numbers. Another scenario that we ran into was the fact that vendors and resellers are companies. Companies have employees. Employees want to better themselves. They take on better job offers. They move from place to place, right? Well, if you were a person who did tech data, business with tech data as a reseller for a long time, and you were a sales guy, and you were a really good sales guy, let's say you worked for SHI, and CDW says, hey, you're really good. I'm going to throw a bucket of money at you to come work for me. Great, you do. Now, you quit SHI, and the first thing they do is deprovision your identity. And everything that you had done with tech data, all of your personalization options, all of your configuration, everything that you had done across our entire e-commerce experience was gone. And then you go to CDW, hey, here's great, here's your new ID, and you're basically starting at day 0 all over again. It was a scenario that a lot of people didn't like. Of course, nobody wants to admit they hate because they moved from one job to the other, but it became a big issue. So here's an example of kind of the pain that we were dealing with, right? In this scenario, imagine that you had multiple account numbers. You were dealing with 2 different systems. These systems had different password strength requirements, different password reset requirements, different password reset capabilities. I mean, if you had multiple accounts, you had multiple IDs, you could be battered with password reset messages all day and not even know why. And you have to keep track of which ID I had to use to log into which system. It also made tracking users and what they were doing nigh impossible because we had 16 versions of the same person running throughout our system. Add to that a particular individual acting across multiple accounts in different contexts may only have specific authorizations based on that account number. Case in point, if you're a vendor and you're coming into tech data and you want to say, hey, I want to create what we call a special pricing agreement. I won't bore you with the details. It's not exciting. And you could do that on vendor account 1, 2, 3. However, if you're on account 2, 3, 4, you're only allowed to view for research purposes, and that's it. So in case of this scenario, you had to have a minimum of 2 IDs just to handle this one scenario. So here we have what I call my worst case scenario. And our victim here is Rodney. And Rodney deals with tech data on a multitude of experiences. He has to deal with us as a vendor on multiple accounts. He has to deal with us as a reseller on multiple accounts. He goes through multiple portals. He actually accesses multiple account numbers with different permission sets depending on the account number to which he is acting. So if you can look at this slide, he's managing 5 accounts, 5 sets of credentials for no good reason whatsoever. At first, I thought this was some kind of like really weird edge case. And then I started looking at our user accounts, and luckily we allowed duplicate email addresses. And I found out that 25% of our users had this problem. They were managing multiple IDs. Introduced the fact that as tech data started to introduce a new line of businesses across our partners, from a business standpoint, their immediate reaction was, oh, we need to manage this credit line separately, so we're going to provision yet another ERP account system for them, which meant more credentials, more user provisioning, more password maintenance, more authorization maintenance. I was honestly surprised that my users didn't come to my Clearwater office with torches and pitchforks looking for me. I think it's only because they didn't actually know who I was, so I updated my LinkedIn profile. Which is a mistake I'm not going to repeat. So I complained about this for years, and I warned them, and I felt like the boy who cried wolf, because I was constantly yelling at my management team, they love when I do that, saying, guys, this is only going to get worse, right? We build really great e-commerce tools, but we make managing these tools nigh impossible. Users, our large customers like CDW were already complaining that they were having an issue just trying to manage when they terminated somebody. How do we make sure that we've deprovisioned every version of that person? We had to start putting email alerts in place to make sure that accounts got deprovisioned, that we found duplicate email addresses, we warned the admin staff. And then eventually, through some major act of Congress, I actually don't know the reasons behind this, my management team said, Eric, you know what? You're right. Now, we want you to do something for us. We want you to shut up and fix it. So I picked myself up off the floor, realizing that they weren't kidding. And I started to realize, all right, I've been complaining about this story for 3 or 4 years out of my 15 years of tenure at Tech Data. And I had to come up with a list of requirements to figure out how am I going to solve this headache. And I said, all right, step 1, users have to have a single identity going forward, right? No more of this N accounts that people had to manage. Our data store structure needs to maintain what I call a one-to-N relationship between this particular user and any business interaction they have with tech data, be it vendor, be it reseller, regardless of the account numbers that they have. I don't care if they have 27 accounts, we need to be able to manage it. Users, we have to maintain the ability that a user may have different entitlements based on their specific context of application and account number. We needed it to be secure. You know, in today's world, especially for distribution, cybercrime is a very serious thing. And we don't have anonymous banging on our door with DDoS attacks trying to take down our site. That's not what we deal with. We deal with actual cybercrime. We have people who are paid in various countries, I don't want to insult anybody, who deal with organized crime, and their idea is to sneak in. They want to hijack user sessions. They want to steal credentials. They want to slip in through the front door with the key so we don't know that they're there. Buy high-end, highly movable equipment. Think tablets, laptops, MacBook Airs, things that are easy to move on the black market. Ship them to other destinations overnight and pick them up from some faux delivery facility, like an abandoned building or an apartment or some college kid they've paid who doesn't know that he's taking part in a crime syndicate. And all this happens way before the customer has even been invoiced for the order. We fight this every day. And this is not a thing limited to tech data. This is true across all of distribution. I mean, we have an organization called the Global Technology Council that's dedicated to bringing distributors together to fight this problem. So I said, considering this very real threat, I have to make sure that we are not the weak link in this chain. We need to make sure that our data store is completely safe, right? It has to be encrypted. If the box is compromised, they still should be able to get nothing. Because in this world, if that happens, and if we hear about identity theft, there are real implications to that. Think about having to buy like LifeLock subscriptions for all of your customers whenever you have a data breach, as laws in many states mandate. The next thing that I had on my list was we had to be able to support OAuth 2.0 going forward. Not only did I like it as an authentication standard, but delegation became a major topic as well. While we do have direct integration between our resellers and our vendors, we have a lot of what I call third-party integrators, right? We have a lot of resellers who aren't that tech savvy. They don't have large IT departments, and they pay someone to host their website or have it some internal tool that's leveraged by their sales staff. And this third party is going to post transactions to tech data on that reseller's behalf. And just because a third-party integrator comes to us doesn't mean that I'm going to give them carte blanche access to post a sales order against CDW, SHI. No, I needed a way of making sure that they only had access to post transactions for customers that had agreed to let them do it in the first place. And OAuth seemed to me the best fit. I knew that this project, even though they gave us real money to do it, that it wasn't going to be big bang. I knew for a fact from all the systems that we have, my tenure at Tech Data is 15 years. There's 15 years of e-commerce infrastructure in place at Tech Data. There's a lot of systems. APIs, legacy APIs, several portals, some that we're proud of, some that we're not. And I knew that the idea of having to rewire every single one of them against a new solution was going to be tough. I needed to be able to say, okay, we're going to prioritize, we're going to do our flagship applications, and then we're going to have to keep the current legacy applications pointing to legacy stores, but I still want one user management system. I need one version of the truth. And I need those changes to plug into to be replicated into my legacy systems so that my legacy portals and APIs and the ones that have been, I don't want to say deprioritized, but not prioritized as a list, continue to function. So like any good architect, I engaged several technology providers, all of whom are going to remain nameless except for one. And I gave them what I call my manifesto, my list of demands. I said, this is what I want. I want centralized, I want security. And this is actually a quote. Many of them said I was being unreasonable. I thought to myself, unreasonable? I work for a $27 billion company that operates on razor-thin margins with development timelines that would drive people in this room insane. I know what unreasonable is. I said, I'm personally responsible for coordinating development efforts across disparate teams, trying to ensure global standards across 2 different teams altogether. I've been unreasonable. I know what unreasonable is. I said, wanting to centralize my authorization and authentication into a single application doesn't seem like it's unreasonable to me. So after banging my head up against the wall with a lot of the providers whose names I knew, I talked to my partners over at Ping, because we already had Ping to solve several of our single sign-on solutions. And I said, guys, you have to know somebody who does this. I mean, I know I'm missing something. And they said, yeah, you should talk to UnboundID. And I said, who? I had never heard the name before. So I dug into it, and we started, as I'm sure you guys know, the process, right? You have a sales call, you went up with an engineering call, and I met one of their engineering guys. His name is actually Arnaud. He reports to Terry. And I said, okay, Arnaud, this is what I want. Here's my manifesto. It was the same list I gave everybody else. He looked at it, and he goes, okay. And I said, okay, yes, or okay, no? Which one is that? And he said, no. I said, we can do it. I said, we've done it before. And I said, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no, seriously. And I said, pardon me for not taking your word for it, but I really would like to get a proof of concept going. And he said, yeah, that's fine. And he was so laid back about it that I was genuinely a little concerned. I'm like, this can't be this easy. I can't have overlooked this my entire career. And honestly, I sent him with one of my development teams. I sent him in with one of my security architects, who is not the most agreeable guy on the planet. He may see this later, so he shall also remain nameless. And literally, no joke, in a couple of weeks, they had a POC going that covered my Rodney situation. And we ran through all the hoops. I questioned everything. I said, are you sure this is going to work? And when my security guy said, yeah, Eric, it's going to work, I was like, okay, great. Let's see where this goes. So the POC turned into a production system that we're deploying in July. So now, we had managed to address all the concerns that I have. Customers only have one identity. That's it. Right? It doesn't matter how many relationships that you have. If a user decides to move from company A to company B, even though they're deprovisioned from company A, when they go to company B, all of their user information, none of the account stuff, none of the transactional stuff, but anything to do with who they are as a user and their experience is preserved with them. They have a data sync offering, and it solved all the replication needs that I had. And we're even pushing information to our CRM in near real time, which the SAP CRM guys didn't believe was going to work either. And so we started to work on it, and we used the US. We have two primary development shops, one in the US and one in Europe. And we did this all in the US, and I realized, well, the word global is in my title, so I'm eventually going to have to roll this out to Europe. I'm like, that's going to be a painful conversation. So we started, engaged the development teams, all the security guys, and said, guys, this is what we've done. And they came at us with every question imaginable. They worried about standards. They worried about security. They wanted to make sure that it was up and running, that we had fallback and tolerance and everything else. And when every answer came back yes, after, it wasn't right away. It took a couple of days. And they said, all right. And I said, for the first time in my tenure at Tech Data, I had security, architecture, and development singing the same song. And I tell people this, and my boss hates when I mention this, that should I ever leave Tech Data, this will be one of my legacy items to my company, that I will have fixed this fundamental problem and had global alignment, and the fact that everyone agrees to it. So you guys are probably thinking to yourself, Eric, that's a great story. Thanks so much. What did you actually do? So at this point, I'd like to bring Terry back on the stage, and he's going to actually walk through the mechanics of what we did to accomplish what I refer to as a minor miracle. Here you go, Terry.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, it wasn't much of a miracle, although I will say Arnaud has pulled off many miracles in the past, and he loves an opportunity to solve some of the hard problems that customers have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what UnboundID did to solve some of the problems that Eric talked about, and I'll talk a little bit about what not just Tech Data, but other customers out in the marketplace are seeing. So in this example here, I'll just kind of use some of the same framework here. But Rodney, really, he was just really accessing a couple different clients. In this case, the vendor portal and the e-commerce portals. And in that front end, they were already using Ping Federate, and they had a single user interface for that login, also allowing them to use some of the enhanced multi-factor authentication security options from Ping Federate. And this was in place. And because of our partnership with Ping, it made it really easy to interface the Ping Federate with our backend, the UnboundID data store. This became the one set of credentials. It became the one password policy. One thing that he talked about was every system, every login had different password policies, and so it was very confusing for for Rodney, depending on which system, first of all, which user ID am I using, and second of all, what are my particular password policies, because in some cases they were different. And in this one set of credentials, this one UnboundID data store was their one identity profile and preferences. And you'll see on the slide here, in this case they were using the LDAP interface, and they were minting their tokens, their OAuth tokens with Ping Federate, and through the API they were able to verify that token, and that API was able to make LDAP calls to the UnboundID data store. So from the data store perspective, that's the solution that helped them. From a data governance point of view, and we'll get a little bit more into this, this is where they centralize this is where they manage the policies. And also this is where they can enforce those. In this case here, you see the data broker on the right side there, talking to our data store, the one profile for the user in this case. And in cases where the user management portal is needing data, they're making a REST call to the data broker with an OAuth 2 request. And they would get that response back. But in that data broker, it would be performing different policy. As Eric had talked about, the user would have different contexts of how they're talking to the different portals, whether it be the user management portal or on the previous screen, the e-commerce portal. In those cases, it's sending the REST request to the data broker. It's performing policy to see what it can provide, what's allowed, pulling that information from the data store and serving it back up to the user management portal. Also, it would use the data broker, their API gateway would use that from an authorization perspective. If it were going to pull the data directly from their profile via LDAP, it would be asking the data broker for a policy decision to say, can I go serve up that data? So that's the perspective that we often refer to as a data governance solution. And then there's a way that they're able to see a dashboard across everything that's going on within the data broker and the data store. And that's the UnboundID analytics engine. And this provides a business dashboard, given the app owner, the business app owner, some metrics about how their applications are performing, how many authentications, how many requests are coming through from an OAuth perspective. It also gives the administrators or the operations folks an idea of what's happening across their system, not just from a LDAP perspective, or maybe how many REST calls are coming in, but also, how's the CPU of the machine, how's the storage of the machine, how are things operating from an operational perspective. It also gives them the ability to set their own SLAs across different metrics across the system, so they can be alerted and notified, when things change. So those are the three components that really sat in the back-end server. And so the whole solution looked like this. And so, but this isn't just unique to tech data, and we see this across a lot of different customers today. As you see in this slide, their issues aren't unique. Lately, if you've seen some of what a Gartner and Forrester has been saying, really there's a lot of unique differences between employee IAM and customer IAM. Identity access management. Some of the key differences being some of the drivers you see down below, such as, obviously the scale, the thousands of users to many millions of users. A lot of the enterprise IAM solutions in the market today just aren't geared towards scaling to millions of users. So employee IAM solutions just aren't meeting the needs of customers. In this slide here, you see that there's a difference between enterprise identity and customer identity. In enterprise identity, it's a very captive identity. You don't have a choice. You work for the company, they're going to manage your account, and whether you like it or not, they're going to provide a certain set of password policies that you have to abide by. They're going to, maybe the server might go down for a little bit on a Wednesday afternoon, but it'll be back up. Your profile may not be the same across different systems. From a customer identity perspective, you must earn that identity, or else they'll leave. You have to earn that identity day in, day out. In the end, an employee identity access management, it's all about the process. how do I reduce costs and make the process better? In the customer identity world, it's all about the data, and how can I utilize that data and get more value out of that data, both as a provider of that data, and also the consumer giving you more data and give you more information about how you interact with that customer. So some of the things that we see is first unifying customer identity data. And if you're familiar with a traditional LDAP directory or directories in general, you're familiar with a pretty rigid schema, a schema that has attributes and attribute types. In this case here, you see a profile. It's much more than just user ID and credentials. It's also looking at different aspects about their profile, whether it be maybe some mobile information about the user, some different aspects of the common profile, such as their contact information, say maybe some purchase history. And in this profile, that data doesn't come from multiple different locations, whether it's a transactional system such as an order management system, whether it's from an MDM or a CRM solution. And in the when Eric talked about it, we talked about the synchronization and how we synchronize back to their CRM solution. And this is a very key aspect of supporting a customer IAM solution. How do I synchronize the data back that to the systems of record, sometimes you call it. And in this case here, we'll talk about this a little bit in the next session, but we support this rigid structure that you think of as from an LDAP schema perspective, from a structured aspect, and also from an unstructured data aspect, with supporting native JSON within the data store. Also, being able to support multiple protocols. It's not just an LDAP world, it's also REST, and we support the native REST capabilities directly from the data store. So when you don't have a unified backend, you really start having a very fragmented backend that becomes kind of vulnerable. In this case, you see mobile apps, customer support apps, different loyalty programs, typically running on different backends. And we see this common. We see this across many customers where over time, they have silos of data. And I see some heads nodding, but this is what typically causes to a lot of fragmentation and security vulnerabilities. You're really at the mercy of sometimes the weakest link here. In this case, some of these may have very high secure, if there's PCI policies in place, but a lot of times they're very insecure back-end databases. UnboundID really has put a lot of effort towards securing the identity and preference profile of a user, whether it's for mobile applications, whether it's for loyalty programs. A lot of this information can be brought together, and you see a lot of check marks there. It's all centrally enforced and controlled, and we'll go through some more of this in the next hour. But in this case here, you see some things in there such as encrypted data, whether it's in flight, whether it's at rest, whether it's in memory or storage. We also give you the ability to have multiple levels of privileges within the system. So, some out there are used to the C and equal directory manager or root with God-like authority across the system. Being able to have different privileges across different users makes it a system that you can segregate those duties across multiple users. And of course, the security audit department likes that a lot. So if we pivot a little bit to the policy side, the customer IAM really goes beyond just the kind of front-end web SSO that you commonly think of as web access management. Web access management really is how do you perform the web login aspects, and how do you get just across the moat into the castle? So in lots of cases, once you're across that moat, once you get through the firewall, once you get into the application, you really have free reign on what goes on within an application. You're at the mercy of what the application provides from a data security perspective. In this case here, requests go in, and without some kind of policy engine within the castle, the data comes right back out. And again, you're really dependent upon the application. And I'll get to how we make use of this policy engine for across different apps here in the next slide. But the platform, the UnboundID Data Broker platform, has a policy engine within it that will take a look at the context of what those requests are from a data perspective and provide that result back. Think of it almost as flipping web access management on its head. Instead of providing security to getting into the application, it's the application, how does it govern access to the data that the application needs. So it's what happens when you're within the castle before that data is retrieved back out. In this case here, you see an example where you have a user that's got a lot of PII sensitive information, their name, potentially some information like social security number, credit card, date of birth, and so on. And different applications are going to ask for this data, and they're going to get back different versions depending on many different policies. In this case, it's pretty simple. We've got 3 different policies there. On the left side, you see the internal app. The internal app is going to ask for information about, if you use the Rodney example, Rodney, and there's some industry policies that have been put in place. And these are executable policies that sometimes very coarse-grained, sometimes very fine-grained, but in this case are going to lock down what can be returned from an internal app perspective. And so in this case here, that request would go in, give me information about Rodney for this application, for this purpose. Again, an OAuth 2 request. And that information would come back being enforced to only provide back their name, their preferences, and their date of birth. Now for a partner app, and this could be a third-party partner app, and we see this a lot of times in the retail space where a third-party app is asking for data about a consumer. And today, a lot of customers just say, well, here you go. Here's all the data. Here's all of our customers. And we trust that you're going to use this data correctly. Or they may actually do some filtering and say, well, these are the only ones that have opted out. But a lot of times, the marketing firm will say, well, I'm going to use the data for maybe a mailing, a circular of coupons or something. But by the way, that file you just sent them also has their email addresses in it and their phone numbers and so on. And you could constrain that out, but that's going to be a really difficult task to do. You could constrain that out by just a very coarse-grained policy, but you can also do it based on consumer consent. And on the right side, you see a partner app. In this case, Rodney, an application is asking for it for a particular purpose. There may be a different set of corporate policies, or maybe some consent policies. In this case, maybe the consent policy said that in this case, if it was a marketing example, I don't want to provide my email for the purpose of marketing to me, or I don't want to provide my phone number for the purpose of SMS marketing. And so when that third-party application is asking for that data, they would not only get a constrained list of the users that have consented to it, but also a constrained list of attributes and the actual attribute data that they're requesting. So that rounds out a lot of the UnboundID capabilities. Some things we haven't talked about, some things listed on here. Social login, that's another component of the data broker. Social login from a registration perspective, account linking perspective, and also allowing the customers to unlink those social accounts. A unified view of the customers across channels. We talked about that a little bit. That's with our data synchronization component. Self-service preference and privacy management. In Tech Data's case, they had a user management portal, and that's typically the case with most customers, but a reference application to allow customers to realize and understand how to make those requests to the UnboundID platform. Again, a big one is securing and encrypting customer data from breach. This is a huge one. This has been a part of UnboundID's DNA from day one. It's not really an option anymore. From cradle to grave, we support the ability to protect that customer data from the moment it enters the life cycle of an identity until when that leaves a life cycle of an identity, whether it's put off onto backups, archives. And then the APIs and some of the pre-built assets, like the reference applications we talked about, really allows customers to really speed up time to market. as Eric mentioned, Arno was able to go in and within 2 weeks really showed a full functioning system, proof of concept, and with real running bits and code and reference applications and using SDKs. It's a very common thing that we do, and customers really helps them understand how this would work in their environment. And then web scale and performance. We didn't cover a lot of that today. We'll cover some of that in the next session. But among tech, in addition to tech data, we have many companies that are managing tens to hundreds of millions of identities at scale, doing billions of transactions a day, and literally response times and measured in single milliseconds. And so we have a very efficient backend that allows us to attain those types of levels. So with that, I think we'll open it up for any kind of questions and answers. And with that, I'd like to entertain any questions. Yes.
It's a really good question. So it's not a simple answer. If I told you it was simple, I'd be lying to you, right? One of the first problems we ran into was, as I mentioned before, we weren't using email address as a unique key. And when you're trying to do that inside of an LDAP system, it really doesn't like that. So the good thing is that because we're distribution, we don't sell to everybody, right? We sell to a captive audience of resellers. So we had to have a whole other team of just people who were, and they're really the unsung heroes. I don't give them enough credit, to do change management, right? We had to end up doing, luckily the user stores were both SQL-based, so we were able to do a bunch of reports to find duplicates, look at activity, see if they were just deactivated accounts versus versus ones that were actively doing anything. And there was a lot of customer handholding. We would say, hey, look, here's what's going on. We had large customer. To answer another part of your question, the idea is we actually have this really horrible user ID. It's system generated, right? And while we're planning on letting people migrate over to email addresses as their primary login, we're actually able to use the current ID first, right? And so that's an LDAP attribute that can stay unique. So we were able to get around the email issue that way. But we're still going to be doing a lot of change management, reaching out to these customers saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make your lives easier, right? This is, as I mentioned before, this is not going to be a big bang implementation, right? There's a lot of handholding involved. Did I answer all of your questions? You mentioned. Yeah, no, please, go ahead. Sure. Well, so think of it like this. We actually have a separate management portal now, right? Like when you decide to manage your what I call your tech data identity, you're not logging into our commerce portal, right? We have a maintenance portal specifically called, it's like Profile Manager. It's not horribly creatively named, right? So people will have the ability to maintain these email addresses and change them. We have a two-factor verification process that will let them update it to the new version of it. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, possibly. You might still have some fun and games there.
Oh, no, I trust, yeah. No, well, it's lucky in that we're able to keep email addresses as a piece of metadata, right? It's not really, I was trying to avoid getting hung up on using any particular attribute that could change, right? So luckily we have an UnboundID unique identifier that we can use to drive everything, and whatever we're using as the login attribute can change, and it's not going to blow us out of the water. But that's really the key to all of it, right? Is that we weren't smart enough to do it in our SQL repository. But inside of UnboundID's data store, we actually have a unique ID that's not going to change, and the user doesn't get to play with it, right? And everything else that we do is just tied to it as just additional metadata. Does that make more sense? So we kind of move the cheese to solve the problem, right? It's like sometimes if you have an issue solving a problem, redefine the problem. That's pretty much what we did. Anyone else? Trick questions?
On the user lifecycle manager, you talked about the expiry from a rules engine perspective. Are that customizable about lapsed in
Sure. We never delete anybody, right? I mean, that's rule number one, because whenever we do, we always hear that we shouldn't do it. So what we do now, and it's interesting in that what we've done is that we have different types of permissions that I kind of call like hot topic permissions, right? And a lot of it has to do with being able to view financial information or being able to submit an order or post a service ticket or something like that. And if you have one of these hot topic entitlements, then you're forced into a password reset cycle. And if you don't reset your password, we give you a gentle nudge at first to say, hey, your password's coming up, right? Then it hits a point where you're not allowed to do it at all anymore. But if you're a user who just has, I mean, for lack of a better term, just read-only access, I mean, we don't enforce that same level of strength, so that we don't have to be as harsh to them. But we do make it configurable. We do have certain partners that like to push back on us about how often they want their password resets. We don't publicize that, and I think I just did. Yeah, so we always enforce password management. We never delete anybody. So we have this hierarchy structure where we have the primary user, right? We call him the master admin, and he has delegate admins that we create. And one of the things that we're focusing on is giving them reporting to let them know what kind of activities that they're seeing, right? If we start seeing, we have a lot of internal tracking that I can't talk about the details, but if we start to see funky activity on an account, like it hasn't been active for a while, then all of a sudden it comes in from like a strange IP address, we're able to block the transactions and notify the admins via email. And then if we don't see any activity, we escalate to like actual reaching out to them to let them know what's going on. And that's all configurable by what we're doing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, whether it was your own rules and
No, it's embedded. We actually had a customer. We actually had put it into Unbound. So Unbound actually supports multiple password reset policies and multiple password expiration policies. So you can build your own and plug them in, and then you can apply them as you see fit, depending on each individual user. This should really be your question. You want to answer that part?
Sure, yeah. So with our password policy, we can you can specify across a range of users by group, by different types of user. Really, anything you can create any kind of filter on. You can create different password policies that may dictate, this group needs to have a certain password strength, or maybe have a different password expiration or a number of retries. There's probably about 20 different aspects of a password policy that can be set up, and you can make that as fine-grained across the data store as you would like, or you can, of course, make a default one that goes across the entire directory. So, good question though. And because you can make that be a filter-based, that can actually change over time. So as someone's level, for example, changes, their password policy and strength of it may change over time, as you'd expect.
It's actually an email conversation I was having last week, was that very question about what we're doing for users and expiration periods and all that other fun stuff. And we were able to plug in, as you said, it's not a peanut butter spreader of everybody, right? You actually designate, okay, this user is particularly noisy and a little finicky about how often they want their passwords reset. They don't want us to bother their users, but they're a high volume customer, and we may give them a separate policy, right? So yeah. Oh yeah. I will tell you, after 15 years in distribution, that no two partners are equal. I mean, we may say that they are, but yeah, there are what I call the 800-pound gorilla clients, right? And you have to have the flexibility to address what they want, because they can hold your income hostage, right? So it's no different with us.
So are you working with partners that are pushing back to doing federated SSO?
That's a good question. So I actually kicking myself because I didn't mention it during the presentation, but that was actually a requirement that's beginning to come up now. Is we have partners who say, hey, Tech Data, your solution's great. We love it. We don't want to use it, right?
It's just I don't want my people having passwords elsewhere.
No, absolutely. I totally get it. No, and I'm not exaggerating. Like I literally had this conversation a month ago where we had a very large reseller who came to us and said that. Right? It's like, I don't want to manage these identities in your system anymore. Yeah, you're creating this new system, and it's great. And we didn't have the capacity to take in federated requests. We didn't, right? But now that we're using ping as our common gateway, right, and we can support whatever open standard that they want, and we can provision users on the fly inside of UnboundID, that we're going to start offering that as an integration option.
So then in UnboundID, how are you handling that? Is it all sec identity, security principle?
Yeah, that's all you.
Yeah, so it would depend on how that information comes in via ping fed. If we take like an OAuth use case, it would be it would be an account registration linking that would occur just like a typical OpenID type of use case, OpenID Connect, I should say. And so in that case, you have to, we basically decide within the setup of that what the user principal is going to be, how it's going to be mapped from the data that comes in, typically from an email or from whatever they provide as part of the OpenID Connect claim. Question?
You kind of mentioned just briefly provisioning. How are you guys doing your provisioning from your sort of management app into UnboundID?
That provisioning is actually all being done. UnboundID supports, it's got a huge REST API, right, as its interface. So we're just doing provisioning requests through that. Well, actually through the broker and then through that. So it's literally just a web service call. Once you come up with the, you gather all the user information that you need, right, and it's a REST request into Unbound, and the user gets provisioned. It's actually pretty simple. Yeah, it's not like some weird like LDAP query that you have to write or anything like that. I mean, you do some checks unless you just want to have an error throwback for duplication or something. But that was not the hard part of this project, was getting identities into UnboundID. Anything else? All right. I think we're just at time too. Wow, look at that.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. One thing I will say, just a little bit of plug. If you saw in your seat, we are having a little get-together tonight at Muriel's. If you have more questions, want to have some more discussion, we love to talk to you some more. So thank you very much.